Hello everybody. Thank you to Susie for inviting me to represent National Centre for Universities and Business, or NCUB as I'll call it, at the conference. First time in the Channel Islands, and I've learned quite a bit already about the context that operates here and recent political developments that have influenced what Guernsey can achieve and its relevance to what happens in the neighbouring islands as well. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background about the National Centre. We've heard a lot about the changing nature of work. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but also try and give a flavour of the changing nature or the ways in which higher education has changed in the last 20 years, and then talk about some of the findings that we've got from our work to engage with our members. I'm coming very much from the perspective of business-university collaboration, but some of these perspectives have relevance more broadly in terms of wider sets of employers more generally, and also the education system as a whole. So I hope some of this has some relevance to you in Guernsey. I'm also focusing primarily on the English system because that's what I'm most familiar with, but some of the statistics are UK-wide. So the National Centre for Universities and Businesses is a small charity based in London. Its role is to promote collaboration between universities and businesses. We primarily do that through three broad areas. One is a focus around policy on research and innovation. One is a focus on policy on talent and skills. And the third area is that we're implementing a brokerage tool to connect small and medium-sized enterprises with research expertise in universities. And that Confer, as it's called, is going to be updated in a second version released later this year. This work has three main purposes. So one is that we hope that we are able to influence government policy to facilitate and enhance business-university collaboration. We also want to influence the practices of businesses and universities around particular issues, and also we want to create an environment that enables people to connect. So it could be academics based in universities needing to connect with businesses to advance their academic research, or it could be businesses equally needing to connect with the universities to access their expertise to support innovation in their businesses. So in terms of innovation, there's an opportunity right now because the government has set a target to increase research and development spend in the economy up to 2.4% from the current rate of about 1.8%. That's a huge challenge and requires significant additional investment. It's going to rely quite heavily, if the government is to achieve it over a period of time, it relies quite heavily on businesses investing in R&D much greater than they currently do. That could either be domestic businesses or through foreign direct investment. There's a train of thought that in order for that to happen, the government will also have to provide additional resources to try and leverage some of that private investment. So then it becomes a possible opportunity for a spending review case. So we've been doing some work in that area on research and innovation. Just in terms of the skills area, we've been doing various activities around skills, most recently focusing on three areas: degree apprenticeships, student well-being, and social mobility. So at the moment, or recently, there's been quite a significant growth in terms of graduate supply. So in the last 10 years, the people who are qualified at degree level have increased from around 330,000 to 420,000. Similarly, there's been growth in the number of people graduating with master's degrees, and also an increase in the people completing PhDs. So generally there's been an increase in graduate supply. However, there has also been a huge decrease in the number of people participating in part-time programs, including mature learners, which has certain implications in terms of lifelong learning. Although there has been an increase in graduate supply, the demand from the economy is also increasing. So there's been increased demand for graduates. So the Institute of Student Employers has said there's an upward trend on graduate recruitment. And there's also an increase in degree apprenticeships, although from a low base. This obviously has implications for employers in terms of the market and their access to talent and the challenges of that market. So NCUB has worked with businesses and universities to try and address some of the issues in the system. Just in terms of this slide, so just to give some context, so 65% of children entering primary school today will ultimately work in new jobs and functions that don't currently exist. And around 30% of the workforce in 2030 have already left the education system. What I wanted to represent this through this diagram was the constant challenge for trying to match the different interests that operate, and universities having to respond to students' interests in what they want to learn and how they want to learn, coupled with balancing the interests of things like professional education, professional accreditation requirements and quality assurance within universities to ensure that courses are at the required standard and level against national benchmarks, and also that universities have to essentially relate their students to the local and national markets. So they have to obviously prepare graduates as far as they can in terms of readiness for work, but then there's got to be a balance in terms of where responsibility lies between the learning and employability attributes of graduates versus what the responsibilities are for employers in terms of graduate training. There was a recent, well, in fact, I think it was this week, the skills minister made a comment that was picked up in the Telegraph about how graduates need 18 months to 2 years to get up to the required standard and start to impact on businesses. And my immediate reaction, well, that doesn't sound too bad. It sounds like an 18-month, 2-year graduate training program. But she was coming from the point of view that she's the skills minister, has responsibility for the apprenticeship system, and she's arguing that apprenticeships are of equal value. We wouldn't argue that they aren't of equal value, but I don't think it's helpful to have pitching one route against the other route. I think that they're all valid, and I think that's reflected in our work with businesses. So just to give an example of the way in which higher education has changed in the last 10, 20 years, this is an example from a typical approach on enterprise that a university will provide. It's not particularly new, but it certainly wasn't in place when I was at university. So one example might be that a local entrepreneur or a business will be asked to come into the university and set a real-world example of a challenge that the businesses has been faced with, but set it for the universities in a controlled environment, and then mentor the students. The students will work in groups and then produce a solution to the problem at the end, sometimes judged by their peers to help build resilience, but in that process they will also have to reflect on their experience and get marked on how they've managed to reflect on that experience. Similarly, so my preference is for for these types of examples to be built into the curriculum rather than being outside of the curriculum. If they're within the curriculum, they reach every single student, whereas if it's extracurricular activity, then those students who are sufficiently motivated will access them, and it won't always be the students who are most in need of it. Similarly, I just wanted to touch on some system-level changes in terms of higher education and how the system has changed. So in addition to higher tuition fees and student loans, we now have no student number controls, so universities are potentially free to recruit whoever they can. That's a government policy to try and support widening participation to get people from disadvantaged backgrounds who perhaps haven't got 3 A-levels to come through, so they can combine different types of qualifications and universities can take them on free of any controls in terms of how many they can recruit. There's also new providers coming into the higher education sector. Some of them are for profit, some non-for-profit. And that is a government policy to try and increase competition with the universities. So there's now a register of higher education providers on the Office of Students website, and some of them are organisations I've never heard of, but nevertheless are registered to provide higher education programmes and recruit students who are drawing on the student loan system. And again, there's new regulation through the Office of Students, which is partly about trying to identify systemic issues across the higher education sector and then challenging universities to address those systemic issues, as well as looking at individual university performance in learning and teaching. So in the autumn, the NCB have run a series of events, roundtables and conferences on different areas. So they're primarily focused on 3 areas. One is degree apprenticeships, one is student well-being, and the other is social mobility. And I want to touch on some of these now. So in the so last year we did a little survey of our members on degree apprenticeships to ask about the extent to which they were engaging with the apprenticeship system and were able to access the levy. And then that led on to a call for NCUB to run a conference. So in November we ran a conference which had about 80 business and university members and other stakeholders present, which was set in the context of the government's industrial strategy. So the kind of key points coming out of that conference were that it flagged the issues that were largely already known about the system of apprenticeships. So things like the system is very slow. It's I guess it's meant to be employer-led, so groups of employers are required to get together, develop a job specification relevant to their industry, work with an educational provider to ensure that the learning attached to that apprenticeship will help achieve competency for the job role, and then they have to apply to the government to get that signed off and the apprenticeship standard in place. And it's that final bit which has been a bit of a bottleneck. So there's been a restriction in the number of standards available, which has restricted employers in being able to access the levy. So that came through quite strongly in the conference. Another aspect was that business members said that they are adopting broad strategies for recruitment of talent and skills for their business. So utilising degree apprenticeships alongside graduate recruitment, use of placements as a recruitment mechanism, as well as other aspects such as engagement with schools and other routes to recruit young people. Degree apprenticeships generally at our conference were being utilised as primarily a workforce development tool. So generally, the businesses that we engage with, they weren't recruiting people direct through the education system. Having spoken to a range of higher education providers, it's a bit of a mixed picture, but certainly the use of degree apprenticeships for their existing workforce to address skills gaps, for example, was seen as a very valuable route to both enhance the talent and skills of the organisation, but also utilise their apprenticeship levy. The costs, there was discussion around the costs of the apprenticeship model versus direct graduate recruitment. So some businesses were questioning whether the apprenticeship model is actually good value for money. There was a view that actually it's lower cost to recruit a graduate and train them up. However, they did point out that apprenticeships are generally more loyal to the company, whereas graduates are much more mobile. So typically they'll join a business and some will just move on from business to business until they settle into a career in the later phase of their careers. And that has been borne out by earlier NCUB evidence, where we did analysis of graduate mobility, and it just bore out that graduates are more mobile in the early phase of their careers. And finally, on degree apprenticeships, it's a valuable progression route for people coming through both the forthcoming technical level routes and also from lower level apprenticeships, more so than direct entry or crossing over from the technical routes through to higher education. The other area that NCB explored last autumn was a series of roundtables around social mobility. Social mobility is kind of more of a public sector societal language, whereas in terms of businesses, what they're interested in is diversifying the workforce, which we heard about this morning, and new approaches to try and do that. I guess what came out of the discussions that we had was that in some cases, businesses might have a desire or an aim to increase the diversity of the workforce, but not all elements of the businesses were operating to best effect in that direction. So to give an example, there was a priority to use different recruitment methods to not disadvantage people from more diverse backgrounds, so moving away from competency-based applications through to strength-based, so moving away from, give me an example of a time when you've managed to show leadership, and asking them a situational question and how they would react. But yet, other parts of the business were still engaging with certain types of institutions, so typically the large businesses have relationships with a small set of universities that they've traditionally engaged with around graduate recruitment, such as through the old milk round process, yet not seeking to broaden out to different types of institutions that might have more numbers or proportions of students from more diverse backgrounds. So there was some frustration about that on the university side. Nevertheless, it's an area that we want to keep focusing on, so we'll revisit these issues in the coming months. The other aspect of this was about the use of work experience as a recruitment tool. And so recognition that placement activity can be down to social capital. So if you've got a parent or a relative or a friend of a relative who is able to place that person into a business, and that's an advantage to them, but others don't have those types of contacts. So there was an example given of the Social Mobility Foundation, who have got an initiative which sort of challenges businesses to say, okay, if you're placing a person of a friend or a relative into your business, then please also match that with a person from a more disadvantaged background. Sorry, I've gone way off. Right. Just to wrap up, I just wanted to mention one aspect, which was although NCUB has a set of activities on research and innovation and another set of activities on skills and talent, those two areas merge in terms of skills for innovation. And it's a possible area for NCUB in the future. It's also an area that's of interest to government through their agency called UK Research and Innovation, and they're developing a talent stream. So it will look at different aspects of the human capital element of innovation and where the strengths and weaknesses lie. There was a 2014 report, which is referred to on the slide, which benchmarked the UK in different areas, and on skills and talent they pointed out two main weaknesses. One is insufficient domestic human capital to exploit science and innovation, so businesses not necessarily having the absorptive capacity to utilise new discoveries and knowledge coming out of universities and assimilating that within their own business for the benefit of innovation, and also below average management skills. So in terms of in terms of degree apprenticeships, an example is that the two most what's the phrase I'm looking for? The two degree apprenticeships which have the most apprentices on them. One of them is in chartered management, so it's a positive step that in terms of workforce development for businesses that they're using the chartered manager degree apprenticeship to support development of management skills in the businesses, and that could perhaps benefit innovation. But also in addition to those areas, there's a technician workforce which is also cited as important for technological innovation in businesses and has often been cited as a problem, hence the importance of technical levels feeding into apprenticeships and feeding into university education. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening.